Impossible. The word escaped Beatrix Vaughn's lips before she realized she had spoken aloud. The leather folder slipped from her fingers and slapped against the polished walnut conference table. Every executive inside the hiring committee looked toward their 30-year-old CEO in stunned silence. For nearly 5 years, Beatrix had built a reputation that bordered on myth inside Vaughn dynamics. She never panicked. She never hesitated. She never revealed emotion during negotiations. Yet now, her gray eyes remained fixed on a single line, printed near the bottom of an ordinary employment application. Applicant name, Salvatore Conti. Slowly, very slowly, she raised her eyes toward the man sitting across from her. He wore faded work boots, dark jeans, a plain gray work shirt, no expensive watch, no jewelry, no visible security. Nothing about him resembled the terrifying legend hidden inside confidential government briefings, except his eyes. Cold, still, observant. Eyes that seemed to measure every heartbeat inside the room. Beatrix swallowed. "Would you say your name again?" The applicant answered calmly. "Salvatore Conti." A nervous chuckle echoed from the far end of the table. Chief Operations Officer Preston Kellerman leaned back in his chair. "That's quite a famous name." Several executives laughed politely. Preston smiled. "You know, Miss Vaughn, according to the internet, Salvatore Conti supposedly controls half the ports on the Eastern Seaboard." Another director joined in. "I heard senators know who he is." Someone else added, "My cousin at the bureau has chased that man for years." More laughter followed. Only Beatrix remained silent, because they didn't know what she knew. After her father's funeral, 18 months earlier, she had discovered a hidden safe behind an antique painting inside his private office. Inside were classified financial records, encrypted correspondence, and one thick black folder marked only with 2 words. "Do not copy." There had been only one photograph inside, a surveillance image taken from nearly 200 feet away, a younger man walking toward a private airfield. The intelligence report beneath the photograph contained only 3 confirmed facts. Salvatore Conti, age unknown, face rarely photographed, never arrested, extremely dangerous. Her father had written one sentence beneath the report in blue fountain pen. "If you ever meet this man, tell him the truth before anyone else lies to him." She had never understood why, until now. Because the impossible man from that photograph sat less than 10 feet away, applying for a janitor position. Beatrix slowly closed the application folder. Her voice became almost a whisper. "Everyone else." She looked around the conference room. "Please, leave us." Confused expressions appeared instantly. Preston frowned. "Beatrix, we're interviewing maintenance staff." "I said leave." Her tone allowed no discussion. One by one, executives gathered their laptops and files. Some glanced curiously at Salvatore. Others assumed their CEO had recognized a former employee. Within moments, only 3 people remained. Beatrix, Salvatore, and Preston Kellerman, arms folded. "I'm staying," he said. Beatrix met his eyes. "No." A brief silence stretched between them. Preston forced a smile. "Of course." He walked toward the door. Before leaving, however, his eyes lingered on Salvatore for just a second longer than necessary. The door closed. Silence settled across the enormous conference room. Beatrix finally spoke. "You aren't here for employment." "No." "You could have requested a meeting." "I did." She frowned. "When?" 3 months ago." Beatrix searched her memory. "Nothing." Salvatore answered before she could ask. My requests never reached your office. A chill crept across her spine. That should have been impossible. Every executive request passed directly through her personal assistant, logged and time-stamped. No exceptions. Who blocked them? She asked quietly. Someone who didn't want you to know what I came here to tell you. Beatrix's chair scraped softly as she leaned forward. And what did you come here to tell me? Salvatore studied her for a long moment, as though weighing exactly how much truth she could absorb in one sitting. Your father and I did business together for 11 years. Legitimate business. Shipping insurance, port security contracts. He was one of the only people in your industry who ever kept his word without needing it notarized. His expression didn't change, but something in his voice softened fractionally. 6 weeks before he died, he came to me. He believed someone inside Vaughn Dynamics was systematically draining the company's pension fund through a series of shell logistics contracts. He asked me to help him trace the money quietly, without alerting the board, because he didn't yet know how far up the corruption went. Beatrix's throat tightened. My father died of a heart attack. Your father died 3 days after telling me he suspected his own chief operations officer of fraud. Salvatore's dark eyes didn't waver. I'm not telling you he was murdered, Miss Vaughn. I'm telling you the coroner's report was never independently reviewed, and I'm telling you the timing troubles me. The room felt suddenly very cold. Why come here as a janitor? Beatrix asked, forcing steadiness into her voice. Why not simply request a meeting through proper channels? Because I did, 3 times. And each request disappeared before reaching you. Because the man most likely to have blocked those requests just left this room looking at me, like he recognized my face from somewhere he shouldn't have. Salvatore's tone remained level, almost gentle. And because a janitor sees things a CEO never does. Server room access logs, which offices stay lit past midnight, whose garbage contains shredded documents that shouldn't exist. Beatrix stared at him. You're asking me to trust a man my father's own intelligence file called extremely dangerous. I'm asking you to trust that your father wrote one more line beneath that file. Tell him the truth before anyone else lies to him. Salvatore's gaze held hers, steady and unblinking. I'm here to keep that promise. Nothing more. Against every instinct of caution she possessed, Beatrix hired him. She told the board that Salvatore Conti, under the far less conspicuous employee alias of Sal Russo, had come with a strong personal recommendation and would be joining the overnight custodial staff. Preston Kellerman raised no objection, which struck Beatrix as its own kind of confirmation. Over the following weeks, Salvatore moved through Vaughn Dynamics with the quiet invisibility of a man who had spent his entire adult life being underestimated in rooms full of people who considered themselves powerful. He emptied trash cans that hadn't been emptied in years, and in doing so, recovered 3 shredded documents that Beatrix's forensic accountant would later describe as the most damning evidence he'd seen in a decade of white-collar investigations. He noted which executive offices ran their lights until 3 a.m., always the same 3 offices, always on nights before major contract signings. He struck up quiet, forgettable conversations with security guards who'd worked the building for years and had opinions about Preston Kellerman that nobody in the C-suite had ever bothered to ask them. Beatrix met him after hours, in the empty executive gym, the only place in the building she could be reasonably certain wasn't monitored by whoever Preston had compromised. The shell company is called Meridian Freight Solutions, Salvatore told her one evening, laying photographed documents across a workout bench. Registered in Delaware, no physical address, no actual employees, no cargo ever moved. Every quarter, Vaughn Dynamics pays Meridian for logistics services that never happened. The money routes through 4 more shells before landing in an account tied to Preston Kellerman's brother-in-law. Beatrix's hands trembled slightly as she examined the documents. This has been going on for how long? 6 years, based on what I've recovered. Your father found it in year 5. And you think Preston had him killed to keep it quiet. I think it's worth asking a real medical examiner instead of the one your board hired. Salvatore's jaw tightened, the first genuine flash of anger she'd seen from him. I've buried enemies who did less than what I believe this man did to a good one. Beatrix looked up at him. You liked my father. He was one of maybe 4 honest men I've done business with in 30 years. Something almost vulnerable crossed his features. I owed him this. The investigation accelerated over the following month, conducted almost entirely in shadows. A forensic accountant Salvatore trusted absolutely. A retired federal prosecutor, willing to review the case off the books, and Beatrix herself, quietly pulling records under the guise of routine compliance audits that raised no flags precisely because no one imagined their CEO capable of building a case against her own COO. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening, 3 months after Salvatore's first application landed on Beatrix's desk. Preston Kellerman had scheduled an emergency board meeting, having apparently caught wind that something was closing in around him, though not yet certain what or from whom. He arrived flanked by 2 of the company's private security contractors, men Beatrix would later learn had been quietly added to Meridian's payroll 18 months earlier. I don't know what game you're playing, Beatrix, Preston said, his composure cracking at the edges as he took in the assembled forensic accountant, the retired prosecutor, and the janitor, standing calmly by the window with his arms crossed. But accusing me in front of outside counsel without board authorization is a legal liability you cannot afford. Meridian Freight Solutions, Beatrix said, sliding a folder across the table. 6 years, Preston. Nearly $40 million. His face drained of color, then hardened into something desperate. That's fabricated, circumstantial. You'll ruin this company's reputation chasing a conspiracy that doesn't exist. The conspiracy exists, Salvatore said quietly from the window, his voice carrying an authority that made both security contractors instinctively straighten. The question is whether it stops here quietly, with restitution and resignation, or whether it becomes a federal matter that follows you for the rest of your life. Preston's eyes flicked between Beatrix and Salvatore, calculation warring with panic. Who exactly are you? He said to Salvatore, though the tremor in his voice suggested he'd already begun to suspect. Someone who kept a promise to a dead man, Salvatore answered. I'd recommend you focus less on my name and more on the fact that everything you've stolen has already been traced, documented, and forwarded to 3 separate federal agencies. The only decision left is how much dignity you'd like to keep on your way out. Preston Kellerman resigned within the week, quietly enough to avoid a media circus, though not quietly enough to avoid the federal indictment that followed 2 months later, once the pension fund restitution had been fully secured. The coroner's original report was reopened at the request of Beatrix's legal counsel. The findings remained inconclusive, though the toxicology panel that should have been run and never was left a question that would likely never fully close. Beatrix found a strange peace in simply knowing someone had finally asked. The company survived, stronger and more transparent than it had been in years. And somewhere in the process, Beatrix Vaughn found herself standing in an empty lobby one evening, long after the building had emptied, watching a man in a gray work shirt push a cleaning cart toward the elevator bank, and realizing she wasn't ready for him to disappear back into whatever shadowed world he'd come from. You could stop pretending to mop now, she said, leaning against the reception desk. Salvatore looked up, something almost like amusement crossing his face. The floors were genuinely dirty. They walked slowly through the quiet lobby together. "No bodyguards?" Beatrix asked. "They're outside. You came alone. I trust this building." She looked at him. "You trust me?" "I do." The simplicity of the answer carried more weight than any declaration. After a long silence, Beatrix stopped walking. "When you first came here, I thought you wanted revenge." "I did." He watched her expression shift in surprise. "But not anymore." "What changed?" Salvatore gazed through the glass entrance toward the city lights. "I've run an organization since I was 25. I've negotiated with politicians. I've survived betrayals. I've outlasted rivals." He turned toward her. "But I'd never met someone willing to risk everything, to expose the truth about her own company." His voice softened. "You reminded me of your father." A quiet smile. "And then you became someone entirely your own." Beatrix lowered her eyes. "I was terrified." "I know. I almost told security to have you arrested." "I know. I almost believed Preston instead." "I know." She looked back at him. "Why didn't you leave?" Salvatore answered without hesitation. "Because every day, you chose courage over comfort. I've learned that's rarer than power." For the first time since her father's death, Beatrix no longer felt alone. Not because she stood beside one of the most powerful men in the country, but because someone finally understood the weight she had carried in silence. She stepped closer. "So, what happens now?" Salvatore looked around the quiet building. "The conspiracy is over. The money has been recovered. The guilty are facing trial. My work here is finished." A strange sadness settled between them. "So this is goodbye." He looked at her for several long seconds. Then, "No." He reached into his jacket and placed a small brass object into her hand. It was an ordinary employee badge. Employee 4831. Sal Russo. Facilities maintenance. Hourly wage, $22. "I'd like to keep one title." Beatrix smiled through tears. "Janitor?" He nodded. "One day, when this company forgets why it survived, I'll come back. I'll mop the floors and remind everyone that the strongest foundations are built by people nobody notices." Beatrix closed her fingers around the badge. Then, before either of them could overthink the moment, she gently took his hand, not because he ran an empire, not because the world feared his name, but because he had first earned her trust while pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways. Salvatore intertwined his fingers with hers. No promises, no dramatic speeches, just quiet certainty. Two people who had met as strangers, fought as allies, and chosen each other as equals. Outside, the city continued rushing toward tomorrow. Inside Vaughn Dynamics, a maintenance cart remained parked beside the lobby wall. No one ever removed it. New employees often asked why the old cart had been preserved inside a glass display. Veteran workers always answered the same way. Because one ordinary janitor reminded this company that integrity is the most valuable position anyone can ever hold. Thank you for watching Beatrix and Salvatore's extraordinary journey. If this story reminded you that true character is revealed through humility, courage, and loyalty, rather than titles or wealth, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more unforgettable stories. And tell us in the comments, if you were Beatrix, would you have trusted the mysterious janitor who turned out to be far more than he seemed?